Well, let's start on time. Get as much of Dr. Enright as we can this evening. Thank you. Thank you for coming to Blessed Sacrament's Lenten mission these 2 nights with Dr. Enright. And we thank him for coming. And let's open with a prayer in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, we thank you for bringing us together this evening during this holy season of Lent, where we seek to do your will, to know your will, and to continue on the path of forgiveness and healing. We ask you to bless our speaker this evening, bless all who are here this evening to hear words of encouragement, hope, healing, and forgiveness. For we make this prayer through Christ our Lord. Amen. Welcome again. I'm Father Andy McAlpin, pastor of Blessed Sacrament Parish, and tonight for our first of 2 nights of our Lenten mission, we have Professor Enright. Professor Enright is a devout Catholic and has pioneered the scientific study of forgiveness, which now claims over 1,000 researchers worldwide. A faculty member at UW-Madison, he is the founder of the International Forgiveness Institute. I always thought that's what we should call the church, but... And he has been honored with numerous awards, including the Chancellor's Award for Distinguished Teaching, the campus-wide Hilldale Award in the Social Studies Division for his research on forgiveness, and the WARF named professorship, the Aristotelian Professorship in Forgiveness Science. His national conference on forgiveness was the first of its kind in any university campus. He is a popular speaker on the moral development of forgiveness, with his work appearing in such outlets as Time Magazine, the Los Angeles Times, the Chicago Tribune, and ABC's 2020. He is a former member of the editorial board of Child Development and is currently on the editorial board of the Journal of Early Adolescence. He and his students are currently developing a series of research projects which we don't have a lot of time to go into. That's enough for now. And again, I thank you all for being here. And it's fortuitous in many ways. Those of you who went to Mass this morning, you heard the gospel from Matthew. I won't say it because I think Professor Enright's going to mention it. It is very appropriate for our discussion this evening. And so please welcome Professor Robert Enright.
Thank you, Father, and thank you to all of you for being here. We're going to talk about something difficult, forgiveness. And since it's Lent, I think I'm your penance for Lent, okay? You'll have to forgive me for that, but let's see what happens. You should have a handout, okay? If you don't have a handout, Maria can furnish one for you. You might want to just raise your hand and she will give one to you. And our job tonight is to take a look at what forgiveness is and how we go about it. And then tomorrow, we're going to take a look at the much deeper view of forgiveness, where we're going to really strap on our seatbelts and go for a much more bumpy ride in talking about forgiveness from the Catholic perspective, which is the deepest I have ever been able to see about forgiveness, having studied it now for 38 years. I have persisted in the study of it at the university. They haven't always loved me for it either. Okay? It was always a little bit of a struggle to study something as spiritual and deeply spiritual as forgiveness in a radically secular environment. But by the grace of God, we're persevering in that. Forgiveness is basically about woundedness. It's about the broken heart. And that's what makes forgiveness as a moral virtue heroic and at the same time very, very important. Obviously, it's extremely important to Jesus Christ himself, who told Peter that he needs to forgive 70 times 7, which doesn't mean at the 491st offense you stop, but you persevere. You persevere in forgiving as a way to mend broken hearts, possibly toward the one who has hurt you, possibly for yourself, and possibly for others who have been part of your circle who have had to walk the woundedness with you. Forgiveness truly is a way of mending the broken heart. And that's why it's so important, and I think really, really needs to be at the heart of our faith. I think it needs to be there and discussed with loved ones, with parishioners, because it really is the antidote to the wounded heart, particularly the wounded heart when you have been treated unjustly by other people. That's where forgiveness centers, in having a response to someone who has wounded your heart. And you respond with a moral virtue. It almost seems kind of ridiculous in some ways. You mean my boss is all over me and is mean to me, and I'm going to respond to the boss with kindness or respect or generosity or love? That's crazy. Well, sometimes mercy appears crazy, but it's not. It's a whole different way of responding to the broken heart than trying to fix the other person, trying to stand up for what is right. Justice first. Justice first. I have spoken 14 times in the Middle East on the topic of forgiveness because I've been invited in. I don't push myself into the Middle East. And I tell people, well, we're not going to talk about the politics here. We're going to be talking about your own family circle in the woundedness and the healing. Okay, no politics. Does everybody understand? And after about 5 minutes, someone yells at me. I have given 14 talks in the Middle East, and I've been yelled at 14 times. Okay? Because people tell me to shut up and sit down because I am a shill for, depending on with whom I'm talking, Israel or Palestine. They think I'm a shill for the other side, and I'm not. I am there to help them who have been wounded to heal their hearts and their families' hearts so they can go on well in life. And without forgiveness, I fear for what is going to happen now in Israel and Gaza and related areas with all of the deaths and the hostage situations. And yet there is a way out if you look within your own circle, if you look even within your own heart. So what is forgiveness? Let's take a look at Roman numeral 1c, a working definition of what forgiveness is. It's really, 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 really important that we understand what it is before we move forward tonight, because most people, I have found, misunderstand what forgiveness is. When I do a Google search of the literature on the internet, almost always I see information that says forgiveness is giving up of resentment. It's giving up of the hatred. Well, that might be part of what forgiveness is, but I could get rid of hatred toward my boss and then turn my back on my boss and say, my boss isn't worth my time, I'm out of here. And my boss is almost less than human the way he treats me. I don't feel angry anymore with him when I see him as less than human. So you see, forgiveness is more than just simply getting rid of your resentment. I have found that forgiveness, I'll give you a one-sentence definition and then go a little bit more deeply, is, gasp, gulp, are you ready for this? Being good to those who aren't good to you. How fair is that? All right? Being good to those who are not good to you. It seems like you're kind of being played for a sucker. All right? But it's because people have this idea of justice and straightening things out and doing what is right and getting what is right for me, that forgiveness trips people up because it's in the realm of mercy. So justice and mercy can grow up together, but forgiveness's role is to deliberately, through your own free will, trying to be merciful to those who are not merciful to you. And that's why it's ignored in secular society. It's why it's controversial in secular society. And it's why I'm told to shut up every time I talk in the Middle East. Because it seems like we're not getting our due. All right? Because you're being merciful to those who are not merciful to you. And there's more to it, I have found. When you forgive, there are 6 things that you engage in. 6 things. First of all, you do try to get rid of the resentment or the anger toward the one who hurt you. Those on the internet are right, but they've left out 5 more things. All right? Yes, you deliberately strive to get rid of the rancor, the hatred, the resentment that is built up in your heart from unjust treatment. But you also, as a feeling, try to work on a softer heart toward the one who hurt you. One that is open to feelings eventually of some compassion toward the other person as person. So you get rid of the negative and you offer the positive in terms of feelings. That's 2 of 6. Third, you get rid of negative thoughts deliberately toward the person. You don't condemn the person. See, the person is more than those actions against you. And that takes time to develop. So you try to get rid of condemnation of the other, and you try to have more positive thoughts toward the other as a human being, as a full person who's more than those actions against you. So you get rid of negative thoughts and try to have more positive thoughts. You try to get rid of the negative feelings in your heart and cultivate more positive feelings. And where possible, you also try to get rid of the negative behaviors. We call it revenge. And you deliberately forswear that. And then you try, because forgiveness is an act of mercy, try to behaviorally do something good for that other person. Well, what if I can't interact with the person anymore? Or what if the person's deceased? What if it's a relative who treated you very badly when you were growing up and the person's deceased? Do we cut that out? No. A good behavior toward that other is praying for the person's soul, or maybe donating some money to charity in the person's name. All right? So you still can engage in positive behavior toward those who hurt you and are no longer in the world. So what is forgiveness? It's a moral virtue dealing with goodness, where you are deliberately, through your free will, trying to be good to those who aren't good to you, and you try to get rid of negative thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and institute positive thoughts, feelings, and behaviors towards someone who broke your heart. That's what it is. And Aquinas, St. Thomas Aquinas, and Aristotle before him, told me, because I read about it, that it takes practice to cultivate all of this kind of mercy in your heart. It takes a while to become what I call forgivingly fit. It's like becoming physically fit. You don't all of a sudden say, if you've been a couch potato for 5 years, I'm going out and run a marathon, man. You're not going to get very far. You have to start slowly with your training and build up. You walk around the block a few times, then you run around the block a few times until you can handle a mile and then more. 1 push-up, and then maybe 50 eventually. Becoming physically fit takes time and practice and willed attempt at it. Becoming forgivingly fit is the same. And so, if you have not really thought about forgiveness in the way I'm talking about it tonight, then you've got some work to do if you decide to engage in forgiveness. It's your choice. I have a book called Forgiveness as a Choice because I don't want it to be a demand. I want people to be drawn to it. And it takes a while. And so think about that. Do you want to start a program of becoming forgivingly fit? As a protection of your heart, the heart of the person who hurt you, and your loved ones who oftentimes are the victim of the mayhem. You see, if you have loved ones and you're miserable all the time and you're pouting and you're angry, that's going to spill over to them. And they too will experience your pain and the pain caused by the other person. So when you become forgivingly fit, you do so not just for yourself or for the one who hurt you, but you also do it for your loved ones who can become victims of your broken heart. Do you see how important forgiveness is for community, family community, church community, work community? Right? How very, very important it is. Why don't we talk about it enough in societies? I don't get it. I really don't understand that. Point 2 on the handout. What I like about forgiveness is it ties into what we Catholics call natural law, which is what we call written on the heart. We know when we think about it deeply that forgiveness is worthwhile. It's worth the struggle to become forgivingly fit. It's worth the pain of getting up and working on your heart that is broken, and you want to kind of hold it like that for the rest of your life because that kind of anger can be empowering, but over time it can really do a number on you. And what I find, I'm an egghead professor, I read everything I can on the topic. I see that when I study, as you can see in number 2 here, Hebrew, Christian, Muslim, Confucian, Hindu, Buddhist perspectives, all of them have a positive place for forgiveness in their teachings. In all of these ancient ideas about forgiveness, there's no negative words about it. All right? And I find that amazing. In other words, you and I could sit down at a peace table with a Catholic and a Lutheran and an evangelical and Orthodox Hebrew, liberal Hebrew, Muslim, Sufi, Sunni, Confucian from China, Hindu, Buddhist people, and we could all agree that forgiveness is a good thing. We could all agree that forgiveness is having mercy on others who do not have mercy on us. Even though there are wide disagreements, and sometimes, as we know right now, fighting among people with some of these different views, we could all sit down and agree that forgiveness has a place within our group and between and among us. And I really like that, and I'm amazed by that. There must be something to it. If all these very diverse worldviews are telling us that forgiveness is worthwhile, to strive to be good to those who are not good to us. And so there's something there for peace of the heart, of the family community, of the larger community, and within our faith-based communities. So with that in mind, let's now turn to some concrete evidence about forgiveness by turning to Roman numeral number 3 here, and look at the oldest preserved account of forgiveness I have ever been able to find, ever. And that actually belongs to the Jewish heritage. It belongs to the Hebrew culture. And I work in Israel. And when I say that to people who are of the Hebrew tradition, they're actually surprised to hear that. A lot of them don't know that. But that's where it has originated. Right? It's originated primarily in the first book of Scripture, which is Genesis. Genesis chapters 37 to 45 talks about forgiveness. Think about that. How many chapters are we talking about here? 37, 38, 39, 44. That's 9 chapters. That's a lot. At the very beginning of the Scriptures. 9 chapters devoted to the idea of person-to-person forgiving. And it deals with Joseph forgiving his brother Benjamin and his 10 half-brothers. You know the story. Basically, the story is that Joseph was the favored son of his father, and there was jealousy there. Our family is supposed to protect us, not abuse us. And what happened to Joseph was he was kidnapped by his half-brothers, and they threw him down a well to murder him, murdering a family member. All right? They didn't leave it at that, Scripture tells us, but they pulled him out. You'd think they finally would have dusted him off and said, "We're really sorry we got so extreme. Please forgive us." But what happened in the Scripture? They sold him into slavery in Egypt. Wow. So that's the second major offense against him. And he had a heck of a time there. When he was in Egypt, the king's wife accused him of inappropriate behavior, and he was thrown into prison. That's the third offense against him. He eventually interpreted a dream of the king, and the king found favor with Joseph and brought him to a position of governmental prominence. Now he's got the power. Ha! And one day, years later, apparently, who comes to Egypt but the 10 half-brothers? Why? What does Scripture tell us about why they were there, if you recall? The Hebrew nation was close to famine and poverty and destruction. And they came for supplies and food. Right? And as God would have arranged it, who is the governor with whom they talked? It was Joseph. But they didn't know that because they thought he was a slave. They didn't recognize Joseph. Okay, he certainly recognized them. And what did the good, forgiving Joseph do? He threw him into prison. Okay, he wasn't forgiving there. Okay, at that point, he didn't seem to have a forgiving heart. But he heard them weeping and lamenting. Maybe they weren't weeping. I think they were lamenting in prison, saying, "This is happening to us because of what we did to our brother Joseph years ago." And when he heard that, Joseph wept. All right? And then he told them that he wanted to see, because they were talking about it, Benjamin. And he said, "I'm going to keep Simeon back to make sure all of you show up, and I want to see this other guy, Benjamin. So they went back to the Hebrew nation. They brought Benjamin back, except for Simeon, who was kept there in Egypt. And when Joseph saw Benjamin, he wept for a second time. Right? Then he played a trick on Benjamin and the rest of them. He gave them all the provisions they needed, the animals they needed to save the Hebrew nation, put a silver goblet in the knapsack of Benjamin. They were almost out of Egypt, and he had soldiers come, pull the goblet out, and accuse Benjamin of theft. His weeping and throwing him into prison, his weeping and playing tricks on them. You see how he's going back and forth with his emotions? Then Simeon ended up in a Christ-like role, tore his own garment, and said, "Take me instead." And at that point, Joseph wept a third time. 3 is a big deal in the Bible, all right? 3 years, 3 days in the tomb, for example. 3 in the Holy Trinity, for example. Well, after the third weeping, what did Joseph do? He embraced his brothers. They never apologized because they didn't know it was Joseph. He revealed himself as Joseph, and then he had mercy on them. He had goodness on them. He must have been forgivingly fit, practicing that for a long time before he met them again. And he let them go back to the Hebrew nation with enough provisions and animals to save the Hebrew nation from famine. Did you ever think about that story in this way? 9 chapters on forgiveness? And did you ever think about it also in this way? He forgave unconditionally. There was no condition to his forgiveness. He didn't wait until they apologized. He didn't wait until they changed. He reached out to the half-brothers who wanted to kill him and sold him into slavery. And he reached out to them in such a powerful way that his forgiveness helped to save the Hebrew nation. You and I, as Christians, have our ancestral ideas in the Hebrew thinking. Right? Joseph helped preserve that Hebrew thinking, which then was transformed radically and beautifully in Jesus Christ. And without Joseph's forgiving the half-brothers, would the Hebrew ideas have continued to exist? He played a part, Joseph played a part in preserving for you your belief system. You and I both owe a lot to Joseph. If you and I can go to church, listen to a talk like this, believe in Jesus Christ and all that has been handed down to us for 2,000 years, and someone who played a role in that is Joseph through his forgiving. That's how important forgiveness is, everybody. All right? Did you ever think about forgiveness that way? That's how important it is. We have a parallel kind of a story in the New Testament. And this one comes, of course, we're all very, very familiar with it, the prodigal son. And the Koine Greek word for forgiveness is aphiemi. For the Old Testament, the word you see in the Hebrew Bible is salach. Salach is the Hebrew word for forgiveness. In the Koine Greek, it's aphiemi. And agape love. And we see this idea of aphiemi in the prodigal son. We see the word agape, which is loving others in service to them even when it's painful. in Matthew 22, 36 to 40, when we are told to love our neighbor as ourselves. And that's hard sometimes. And that involves a lot of implicit forgiving. But the prodigal son is parallel in its similarity to Joseph. What we see here is a very disrespectful son who asked the father for his inheritance before the father passed away. That was not a very polite thing for a Hebrew boy to do. He then left. They didn't have the machinery for farming back then. And the expectation would be to help out on the farm. He left, squandered the money to such a degree that he'd end up working with the swine on a pig farm, which is definitely not a good thing for a Hebrew boy to do because pork is prohibited. He was brought that low. And so he decided to go back to his father and repent. To say he's unworthy to be the son, he could just simply work on the farm. And he did go back, and when the father saw him a long ways away, and the father didn't have a cell phone to say, just a minute, yes, son, No, he had no idea why the son was coming back. What did the father do? He unconditionally, without condition, without waiting for the prodigal son to repent, he ran to him, he embraced him, he showed compassion on him, and gifted him by killing the fatted calf. He had thoughts and feelings and behaviors toward him that were very soft, were very compassionate, very good, very giving, as he was forgiving his son, who didn't even have a chance to apologize yet. So are you and I asked to forgive unconditionally? I want to wait till people apologize. I want to wait. It's only fair. But forgiveness isn't about fairness. It's about mercy. And when we have mercy on others, we don't necessarily wait until they behave in a fair way toward us. We are merciful whether the person is fair to us or not. And those two stories right there, everybody, tell us very, very clearly that forgiveness is quite a challenge. It's tough. It's hard. And we don't wait for the other's response. We go ahead with the gift anyway. Whether it is of provisions and animals, as happened with Joseph, or the embrace by the prodigal son's father. So I hope you see concretely the gift that the scriptures have given us as to what forgiveness is and is not. Because you know what? It's now our turn. All right? But before we turn to our turn, let's take a look at, on the next page, at Roman numeral 4, because I want to go a little bit more clearly as to what forgiveness is by talking about what it is not. Okay? Forgiveness is not excusing what the other person did. If you notice, Joseph never said, "Oh, it's okay that you wanted to murder me and threw me into slavery." No, that was wrong. That was wrong, is wrong, and will always be wrong. The prodigal son squandering the money and leaving the father was wrong. And even when the father was hugging the son, what the son did was wrong, is wrong, and will always be wrong. That doesn't change. So what are we doing when we're dealing with forgiveness? We're not focusing on the action. We're not focusing on the injustice. We are focusing on the person as person. We are focusing on the person as beloved, by God at least, and it might take time for you to have that beloved sense. The focus of forgiveness is on a person, not on the actions. And Joseph and the prodigal son's father had to break through those actions to acknowledge the personhood of those who abused them. So you don't excuse the wrong. But your response to the other, remember the 6 points? Getting rid of negative thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and instituting positive thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Those are toward the person. Right? We don't really forget. We use the term forgive and forget. I use the term forgive and remember in new ways. If you've ever had a sports injury where you've injured your ankle or your knee, you don't forget it, but you don't remember it in the same way as the excruciating pain and the shock of it when you went down with the injury. You look back and you know what happened, but it has a freer passage through your mind. You remember it in new ways, but you don't forget, and that's good, lest it happen again. Because if we have a compulsive gambler with us who has hurt our savings, it's important to remember that when the person said, "Can I have $100? I'll pay you back tomorrow." Probably not. Right? So when you forgive, you remember in new ways. Also, there's a huge difference between forgiving and reconciling. Reconciling is when 2 or more people come together again in mutual trust. You can forgive without trusting someone, like the compulsive gambler. You wouldn't necessarily trust that person with your checkbook because the person is showing you that the behaviors are such that you can't trust the person in certain ways. So you can forgive with a softened heart, softened mind, and softened behaviors while watching your back. When Jesus Christ died on the cross for you and for me, he reached out his arms in forgiving love, unconditional love for you. Does that mean everyone is automatically reconciled to Jesus? That would be universalism, and that's a heresy in the Catholic Church. All right? So he is offering us forgiving love, but to truly be reconciled with him, we have to do our part. When a person has broken your heart, the person has to do something for the 2 of you to come back together again in mutual trust. So you can forgive and watch your back. You can forgive and ask something of that person in the family or in the workplace or in the church. And see, reconciliation is more about finding justice again. Forgiveness is about that mercy of the heart. And then 4th, here's where I get yelled at in the Middle East because people don't really understand forgiveness when they yell at me. We're not abandoning the quest for justice. When you and I are treated very unfairly by others and we have a forgiving heart, the way we approach others and the way we seek justice is probably qualitatively different than would have been the case if we're fuming and we want the pound of flesh. And so justice and forgiveness grow up together. It's not either or. It's not that you forgive and let the other walk all over you, or you strive for justice and remain hate-filled. The challenge is to have justice and forgiveness grow up together. Aristotle taught me that. He said, you don't practice any of the moral virtues in isolation. They get distorted. And so let justice and mercy grow up together. The mercy of forgiveness and justice grow up together. And the way you ask for justice probably will be softer, more persistent because you'll have the energy for it, and maybe you'll have a better justice. All right? That's why when people tell me, justice first, I say, well, that's not going to work out very well if you have a hate-filled heart. See, the peace movement really has to merge the two, and the peace movement has yet to do that. I have yet to see forgiveness coming alongside justice in any of the peace movements around the world. Which brings us to number 5. which is just to give you a sense of some of our science. I'm not going to go through all of this in the next 2 pages, but I'm going to highlight them. The very first scientific study of a forgiveness intervention, working with people on forgiveness and collecting data on it, was done by Monsignor John Hebel, who used to be at St. Bernard Church, now retired. And he did that getting a PhD at the University of Wisconsin. And he worked with elderly women who had a lot of injustices in their life. And when he worked with them on a process of forgiveness we'll be going through in about 5 minutes, they ended up forgiving. And their willingness to forgive increased. And so he showed that if you work on forgiving under his direction, people can get it. They can master it. And we worked with college students who also showed improvement in their mental health when they were deeply hurt by parents. And now they're getting more independent and they look back and there's a lot of pain. Suzanne Friedman, who is now a professor at the University of Northern Iowa, worked with female incest survivors. And every one of them, all 12 of them, at first said, I'm not going to forgive my father or father figure. No, I'll be part of your program, but not going to happen. And they came to us clinically depressed, which makes sense, doesn't it? Because incest is one of the most deeply hurtful injustices in the world, where a father or father figure who's supposed to protect violates. And the response was normal. They were clinically depressed. All of them said no, but I'll do the program anyway. And they went through the forgiveness program. It took a year, one-on-one with Suzanne Friedman, 6 of them, for an hour a week for a year. All right? And at the end, they went from clinically depressed to non-depressed, normal. All right? And a year after that, after the forgiveness intervention was withdrawn, they were still non-depressed. One woman fed her dying father in the hospital and said, I'm glad I forgave because I would have engaged in mourning and rage. Now I'm just mourning. Another brought her children to her deceased father's grave and had a tasteful religious ceremony of respect for the dead, right? Giving the father a good name in the family, not because of what he did, but because there was more to him than that. We worked in drug rehabilitation settings, residential drug rehab. We screened people for deep unfairness against them. Their need for the drugs goes down substantially, and their depression went down substantially. We've worked with cardiac patients on a cardiac unit of a hospital, and we screen them for deep injustices against them, and they're not forgiving. You know what happened 4 months after the forgiveness intervention? There was more blood flow through their heart when they started thinking about the person who hurt them. Because you see, when you're really, really angry with others, science shows us that the arteries to the heart narrow. Okay? When they got rid of that anger and they started thinking about the issue, the arteries stayed open. Dr. Douglas Russell, who oversaw this study, said we helped them avoid sudden death and chest pains. We've worked with terminally ill female cancer patients who had less than 6 months to live, and they forgave family members, some of whom they were having this problem with for 40 years, 40 years. And they forgave, they brought the family to their bedside, and they ended up forgiving. And while they were dying and their physical indicators were going down, their hope for the future was going up because they knew they were leaving the family in a better place. We've worked with women with fibromyalgia, a physical condition, and they've been abused, and the fibromyalgia symptoms got lower. And we just recently completed a study of men in a maximum security prison who had terrible injustices against them in childhood. And they were clinically angry, anxious, and depressed. They went through 6 months of a forgiveness program, and they went to normal levels of anger, anxiety, and depression, and their empathy toward others in general got better as they forgave. Right? Some of them went to medium security because they were no longer such a threat, because they weren't taking the rage out on others in the institution. So look at all these different kind of studies we've done, and in each case, when people learn to forgive, they end up healthier, they end up reaching out to others in their family, and they basically get their lives back. And one thing I found over many of these studies, not all of them, that when you've been deeply hurt by others, you know who you end up not liking? Yourself. That's right. The incest survivors didn't like themselves because they were living the lie that they weren't worth much. They forgave and their self-esteem rose. Their humanity was restored, where they not only would reach out in mercy toward the father or father figure who abused them, they ended up liking themselves, which was not the case prior to forgiveness. So with that in mind, let's now turn to our final topic of today. How do you go about forgiving everybody? I'm going to lead you on what we call a guided private reflection. It's not the Catholic version. You're going to get the Catholic version tomorrow. But I'd like you to think about one person. Don't take the person who has brutalized you. Don't think about that person yet. You need to become more forgivingly fit before you go there. But think about a person who has hurt your heart, and you still carry that with you, whether that happened 40 years ago or yesterday. Think about someone. I'm going to do the same. I'm going to be thinking about someone who has hurt me, all right? And I'm going to go through the process that Suzanne Friedman did with the incest survivors, Monsignor Hebel did with his parishioners who were hurt deeply, with those who were in hospice dying, and the cardiac patients, all of them. And I'm going to go through this with you so that you get a sense of the pathway, and you have it written down here so you can kind of use it as a checklist to keep at it. Because there are 3 things you need to do to get better at forgiveness. Practice, practice, practice. Okay? So we're going to be going through 4 phases, as you can see. Phase 1, 2, 3, 4. But first of all, quietly think about someone who has hurt you. And then think about your best friend, Jesus Christ, who loves you. And think about his love before we go on this journey. He loves you unconditionally. His arms are stretched out for a reason. Okay? He's calling you in love to come to him. He died for you out of absolute unconditional love. And it's his love you want to take on this journey with you. All right? Because as Jesus said, apart from me, you can do nothing. You can't even forgive on your own. You need his grace. You need his love. So bring Jesus on this path with you. So think about someone who's hurt you. And we're going to enter phase 1, which is uncovering your anger. And it might not be anger, it might be deep grief or frustration. But a lot of times it's the anger in our heart that really brings us down. All right? The resentment. And resentment in psychology is deep anger that stays with you. So if you have some deep anger from someone, not the most outrageous issue of a person, but a person who's hurt you enough where you have anger, think about how you might, until our talk here today, you might not have truly understood that you have been living with this anger for a while. Sometimes that's quite a revelation to people. You know, I've been living with this anger for decades. Maybe it's time to shed that. So on a 1 to 10 scale, how angry do you think you are? How frustrated, how resentful are you? 1 is not at all, 10 is outraged. Where would you put your anger? Think about that and give it a number. Okay? A 6 or a 7 or an 8 means it's uncomfortable for you. And it should be if you've been treated unjustly. Are you afraid to expose your shame or guilt as a result of this? If someone insulted you in front of others, oftentimes we feel shame. And we don't deserve that. Or we lashed out at the other in return. See, eye for an eye. And now we're feeling guilty about that. And we don't deserve the anger or the shame or the guilt. But if you have some shame or guilt, now's the time to quietly admit it to yourself. Next question in this phase: has this effect of the injustice, the restlessness, the anger, the frustration, whatever it is, has it affected your health? You know the most common health complaint I get when people are living with a broken heart, a damaged heart from injustice? Fatigue. It's tiring to carry around a sack of woes on your back, or the woes in a wounded heart. And if you need energy to get through the day, this is a wound that you don't deserve. And you don't deserve the guilt or the shame, and you don't deserve the anger. You don't deserve the injustice, and you don't deserve these effects. You see, these are the effects of the injustice, not the injustice itself. Do you see how an injustice could happen at a point in time, and we leave that point in time, and we leave the injustice, but we don't leave the effects? The effects of the injustice literally can be with you to your grave. That's what's sinister about injustice and what I don't like about injustice. The effects can literally be with you even though you have walked a long life away from that injustice. See, I'm not talking here, the first phase, about the injustice itself. I'm talking about the effects on your heart, the effects on your mind, the effects on your soul that you don't deserve. Another question I have for you: have you been kind of obsessing about it? Does it come up regularly? I once talked with a young man whose father beat him when he was a child, and he had a dream of his father chasing him every night that he went to bed. He was in college now. He knew what he was going to dream about. Right? That was an effect when he'd already left home. And yet his father was still in his mind and his heart with the dream of his father chasing him every night. He forgave and the dream left. All right? Another thing that happens, and here's where the self-esteem can go down, where you end up not liking yourself. You compare yourself to others. If what happened to you is leading to a rough road, and you look around and others seem to have it all together, you might end up subtly believing the lie that you're a little less worthy as a human being than you should be. And that is not an uncommon effect, everybody. We end up believing the lie and devaluing ourselves because of what happened to us. Have you been devaluing yourself? That's another effect that you don't deserve. Has there been a permanent change in your life because of what happened? Or at least a change where you've had to adjust and you didn't want to do that? Some people have to leave a job because of a tyrannical boss, for example. All right? You don't deserve to have to be making these kind of changes you don't want to make, but those are effects, again, of the injustice. And then finally, and this is a biggie in terms of an effect, has the injustice had an effect on your worldview or your philosophy of life or your faith? You know what I hear too often? How could God allow that to happen to me? God is not my friend. I'm leaving my faith. Well, God isn't the one who did it to you, right? Someone else did by that person's own free will. And in all likelihood, Jesus Christ died on the cross for that person's action, for that person's sin, right? The church isn't doing it to you. God isn't doing it to you. But when our worldview is affected by injustices and pain, we tend to become more pessimistic in our life. And we tend to drift into that. So do you have a more pessimistic worldview? All people are just out for themselves? Or the church isn't helping me in my pain? And you're blaming those who shouldn't be the ones where you affix blame? You see, your worldview can start telling you a lie, where you are now going against people and Mother Church, for example, who are here to help you. But when you believe the lie that you're less than you are, and you begin to believe the lie that God is less than who God is, you're setting yourself up for misery, which is another effect you don't deserve. We've spent 5 minutes on the uncovering phase, and we've looked at about 7 different negative effects that can befall you because of what happened to you unfairly a week ago or 10 years ago. And so we enter the next phase, which is the decision phase, after we've looked at all the effects that are tumbling down on us and making us miserable, and we ask people, how have you been doing in healing from these effects? How were the incest survivors doing? They were all adults, and they all tried every therapy under the sun before they came to us. And they came to us clinically depressed and not liking themselves. The therapies weren't working. Right? How's it been going for your heart? And if it hasn't been going great and you're not healed from the effects, the big question is, would you like to try a pathway called forgiveness that might heal your heart, might heal the heart of the one who hurt you, and might heal the hearts of those who've been victimized by all this negativity that has come out? Would you like to try forgiveness? Remember, all of the incest survivors said, I won't forgive, but I'll try it. They were, in my opinion, heroic. But you have to will it. You have to want to do it. And if you do want to go on the pathway of forgiveness, remember what it is. You're going to deliberately try to be good to the one who wasn't good to you in your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors toward that person, where you might feel some repulsion. You might have some fear. But we're not asking you to dive into forgiveness yet. We're going to become forgivingly fit slowly. You're not going to be excusing. You won't be forgetting, lest it happen again. You may or may not reconcile, and you can ask for justice as you forgive. Would you like to go on the pathway of forgiveness? That's the second phase, the open door. We call it the decision phase, and we go over the definition just like I did. Now remember, the incest survivors took a year. You and I are doing 25-minute version, okay? So you're going to have to be gentle with yourself on this. I'm introducing it to you tonight, right? So for those who say yes, who willingly through their free will say, yes, I want to forgive, we enter the work phase, working on forgiveness. And we start with thinking. We start with thinking exercises rather than feeling exercises, because it's much easier to think about the other person than to feel good feelings toward the person, because we're much more in control of our thinking. Right now, think about a pink elephant sitting on an orange tree. You can do that. But if I now say, feel compassion toward the one who broke your heart, that feeling takes time. So we're going to start with thinking, and we're going to be starting with thinking about the person who hurt you. See, when we really get to the point of forgiveness, the light shines away from us and onto the person who hurt us. And we start with the thinking exercises that I call the personal, global, and cosmic perspectives. Here's the personal perspective. Think about the one who hurt you. Has this person been carrying any wounds in the heart that might have so disrupted this person that the person dumped the truck onto you? Might this person have been wounded by others and with frustration and having a bad day or a bad week or a bad year imposed it on you? Might that person have a wounded heart? I'm not excusing that person at all. What that person did to you was unfair, is unfair, and will always be unfair. But I'm asking you to think about the person as possibly a wounded person, a confused person, right? A person who might be mistrustful, who might be displacing the rage, the guilt, and all the messiness in that person's heart onto you. Might a wounded person have wounded you? See, this person is more than unjust actions. This person might truly be inside, when no one's looking, have a bleeding heart. That's the personal perspective. The global perspective asks this: can you see that you have a shared humanity with this person? If you are cut, do you bleed? If that person is cut, will that person bleed? Yeah. Do you need good nutrition and rest? How about that person? Will that person die one day? That person's vulnerable. That person is going to die one day, as you will and as I will. Right? You share a common humanity with this person. You also share woundedness, probably. Right? I want to see this person walking the path of life, stumbling, being treated unfairly by others, maybe in childhood, adolescence, or adulthood. Right? And through the wounded heart, wounded you. And then I want you to see how you share person-to-person humanity. Not because of what the person did, but in spite of it. And then we do the cosmic perspective, but only those who have a faith base. So those of you who have a faith base, I want to ask the question, are you made in the image and likeness of God? Yuppers, that's what it says in Genesis 1, the very first book of the Bible. It says all people are made in the image and likeness of God, and it's repeated in the same short chapter. How many times does the Bible repeat anything? And it repeats in the very first chapter that we're all made in the image and likeness of God. Are you made in the image and likeness of God? Drum roll, please. Is the person who hurt you made in the image and likeness of God? Yes. I said that to one person a while back, and she said, I wish I didn't know that. Okay? Because it's a hard kind of a lesson. And when you put them all together, the personal, global, and cosmic perspective, who do you see? A person who is more than those actions against you, who might be stumbling in life because of the actions against that person from others, who's vulnerable, who needs rest, who cuts and gets bleeding, who's going to die one day, and you both share being made in the image and likeness of God. And when you tell that story, you see you're widening the angle of your lens as to who the person is. And when that happens, we tend to start having a softer heart. It's called compassion. Compassion is a willingness to suffer along with the other. If you see this person is wounded, vulnerable, and sharing in the image and likeness of God, even though stumbling through life, does your heart get a little softer toward that person? And if so, we then move to the third point of the work phase, where we ask you to stand up to the pain, to bear the pain of what happened to you so you don't throw it back to that person or to others in your life. Because I have found through my own experience, when you have this restless heart, this angry heart, this wounded heart, we so often tend to be short with our loved ones. We might be short with our colleagues or our fellow parishioners. And what we're doing is we're letting our pain out to others. And if we keep letting the pain out to the one who hurt us, who gives that pain back to us, as Gandhi said, if we keep taking an eye for an eye, the whole world will be blind. All right? So once you see through the wider angle lens the richness and personhood of the other, and your heart starts softening a little bit, we ask you to stand in the pain and to bear the pain for the other. Hospice tells us when we're grieving to lean into the pain. Not to run from the pain, but to lean into the pain, because paradoxically, as you accept the pain and stand in the pain leaves. It's like a sponge saturated with water. When you leave it for a while, it evaporates and the sponge eventually is dry. When you can give a gift of not passing the pain on to the other or to others in your family who are the recipients of your pain, you are giving a gift. So stand up with the pain. Know that you have a model of standing up to pain for you, Jesus Christ. And if you can bear the pain as Jesus Christ has done for you, and you can bear the pain for the other, paradoxically, you begin to heal. And only when the person widens the lens and sees the personhood in the other, has a little bit of a softer heart with a little bit of compassion, and begins to bear the pain, we ask the person to fulfill the quality of the moral virtue of forgiveness by thinking about deliberately giving a gift to the one who hurt you. Only when you're ready, and that takes time. Like the woman who fed her father in the hospital when he was dying. Or the woman who brought her sons to the graveyard and had a tasteful ceremonial, religious ceremony to give a good name for the father, not because of what he did, but in spite of it. As I said earlier, you could donate money to a charity if you can't reconcile with the person. You can pray for the soul of the person. Or if the person is alive and well, you could maybe communicate for the first time in years through a letter or an email or a phone call, and reach out gently, but watch your back if the person isn't really trustworthy yet. That reconciliation, remember, takes time. But think creatively about the kind of gift you may be able to give the person, because that's what forgiveness is about. It's about giving to those who have not been giving to you. And the paradox is, and that gets us to the fourth phase, the discovery phase, as you reach out to the one who hurt you in your pain, and it seems like you're never going to get rid of the pain and you're caving in, which you're not, you are the one who begins to experience a healing you might have never thought possible. We see that people find new meaning in life. You know what the meaning has been for many people with broken hearts we've helped to forgive? They begin to see the suffering in the world much more clearly. They're much more aware of it. So that they see, if they're in a long line at the grocery store, when they finally get up to the cashier, they're not huffy about it. Because they see that person might have been on the feet for 4 hours, and you see the suffering in the one who is now serving you by helping you put your soup cans in the bag. You begin to be attuned to the suffering of others, much more so than was the case prior to walking the pathway of forgiveness. You discover your need to be forgiven, and so you say, I've hurt others too, now that I think about it. Maybe I need to go to them and seek some forgiveness. And so you realize it can be a two-way street. You realize you're not alone, that you haven't walked the pathway of forgiveness alone here tonight, have you? We've been together with my coaching you, and you're going to talk with others later, I'm sure. And so we realize we're not doing this in isolation. What about the grace of God to forgive? Because Jesus said, apart from me, you can do nothing. You can't even forgive and heal your wounded heart without His grace. And then people develop a new purpose in life. The incest survivors surprised Dr. Friedman and me because we weren't ready for this. The vast majority of them said, I want to dedicate my life to helping other incest survivors. They didn't want to become mental health professionals. They wanted to walk alongside those who were suffering this way and befriend them and help them. They developed a new purpose in life. It quickened them. It made their life more meaningful because now they were doing something by putting more love in the world. And that hadn't really dawned on them because they were so insulated unto themselves and so brought down by the fatigue and the low self-esteem. They weren't thinking this way. It opened up the vista of love for them, and they wanted to dedicate their life to that. And we were delightedly surprised by that. And at the end, we find a really interesting paradox of forgiveness. As you give of yourself in mercy unconditionally, not waiting for the other to apologize, to repent, but give of that mercy freely and willingly through widening the lens, compassion, bearing the pain, and giving the gift, you are the one who is healed. We went through the science of it. With drug rehab people, men in the cardiac unit, drug rehabilitation people, incest survivors, all kinds of people. Acid burn victims in Pakistan. Right? We have a study on that as well. Okay, 8th grade students in Iran, we've done that as well. And as they begin to forgive, their idea of prejudice starts melting. You have the opportunity to experience the paradox of love given through healing of your mind, heart, and soul. And that's what forgiveness is about, and we need more of it in the world. Even if I get yelled at 14 times out of 14, we still need it. And I'd like to stop here and entertain questions, doubts, difficulties, anything at all. Father has a microphone here, and he will pass it to anyone who'd like to give it a try.
First of all, I just want to thank you so much. This has just been excellent tonight, so thank you for that gift.
You're welcome.
It seems to me that you have to have a certain amount of strength to go through this. And I think about people who have had injustice done and how that strength maybe has been zapped.
Yep.
So is there a timing factor in this, or a way to help somebody who, doesn't have that strength right now?
The point is that we need a strength to do this, and when we've been crushed by life, we don't have that strength. Actually, what I find happens is you don't start with the strength. The strength actually builds as you say yes to this. So you actually start with the empty tank and don't know if your body as car can go. But as you start with a little bit of widening your lens and seeing the woundedness in the other, a little tiny bit of strength starts to enter you. And you can become surprised by that, energized by that. And that actually is part of your conscience telling you to continue on this path. And the more you do it, the stronger you get. Because see, keep in mind, we don't ask people to bear the pain until they have actually become stronger. Because if we say, well, you'll be much better off if you stand up to your pain. No, you might have to lie down for a while and take a nap every day, okay? But as you start in your woundedness and crawl before you walk, you actually become stronger, and the stronger you get, the more you can enter into these deeper issues of compassion, bearing a pain, and it's hard to give the gift to the other who has hurt you. So you don't wait for the strength will come. That's the grace of God working, in my humble opinion.
I'm interested that after 14 visits in the Israel-Palestine conflict, have you made any headway? And if you have or haven't, why?
Okay, have we made any headway in the Middle East? Well, there's two ways to look at that. Individual headway with individuals and more corporate or community headway. I have made headway with individuals, and here's just one example. I was given a talk like this to about 100 teachers, very similar to this situation. And there was an interpreter over here, and it was right by the Mount of Temptation, okay, way down from Jerusalem. And one of the teachers came up, grabbed the microphone out of the person's hand, and started yelling at me to sit down. That was about my 12th time, and she expected me to crawl under the table, but I was used to it. So I said to her, I want to give you a multiple choice test first, okay, to see whether I should sit down. Can I give you a multiple choice test? She said, yes, sure. I said, two possibilities. A, you will live without your land that you think is yours for the rest of your life. You'll never get your land back. And you will live with a resentment or a hatred that could make you miserable. Or B, you will live without the land for the rest of your life, just like A, but you will be freed from hatred. Which do you choose? She chose B and let me talk. She gave the microphone back to the interpreter, okay? She didn't look at me at lunch, so there was still a little ambivalence there. But her heart opened. Right? We just finished a study in Israel where we worked with, I can't remember exactly, about 20 different classrooms of 5th grade students and teachers on forgiveness education. And we're about to go into Israel now with a foundation, and we'll see if we get the funding or not for it, where leaders in Israel are deliberately going to be working with hostages who have been released and families of hostages to forgive within their own community. Not between the communities, that'd be too hard right now, but within their own community so they don't pass the rage on to their family members. We already have the leaders saying yes. And Dr. Friedman, who did the incest survivor study, and I are ready to go in to help them. And they're ready to roll. And so we have the larger community setting where they're working on the community that has been besieged by October 7th. And we have individuals who are at least open to further ideas. And so I keep at it, and I would stop if I'm supposed to be called out of it. But we're making pretty good progress. Okay, I don't think we're going to be the ones solving the problem in the Middle East. I think the second coming of Jesus Christ is going to do that. Okay, but we're going to do our little part, and it has been working.
I have a question that I can't reconcile in my mind. If there is an ongoing harm coming to an individual, so they were in a relationship that continued to be abusive, Is it possible to, or how would you possibly start forgiveness when it's an ongoing process? It would seem infinitely easier if 10 years ago it stopped and you've had some space and time to deal with it.
Right. Yeah. What do you do when it's ongoing abuse? Maybe it's a partnering relationship and the other is subtly putting you down every day, okay? I say to people who ask me that question, it's even more important that you begin working on forgiveness now rather than waiting. Because the 100th dig at you can accumulate where it's much worse than the first. And it's not like there's just 100 there. It kind of exponentially gets bigger in terms of your anger. So you want to begin the forgiveness process as you get out of bed. You want to be forgiving the person as the person subtly puts you down. And you now, with a softer heart, talk in such a way that you ask something of that other person. You bring justice alongside. But you don't let justice first reign where you are so angry that you just put this person down who's putting you down, and your rage spills out onto that person. With a forgiving heart, you ask something of the person. And if it doesn't work, you know what you do? Forgive and ask again, and forgive and ask again. And you keep at it, and you bear the pain for the other. And sometimes it gets to the point, let's say we're in a boss and employee relationship where nothing is working. Well, then you have to think about perhaps moving to another job. But if you can work on it and say, you know, every time you give me these digs, it really hurts my heart. Are you aware of how hurt I get when you do this? A lot of times the person isn't even aware of how much hurt is inflicted, okay? Or if they are, what is it about getting this power over me? Let's examine what might have happened in your past. Were you raised in such a way where you were put down? A lot of times we reproduce what happened in our family of origin. So if we can examine that with people, sometimes the light bulb goes on and then the person's willing to work with us. Practice forgiveness before you get up. Practice forgiveness before you speak to the person, and bring justice alongside. And look at the past of this person to see if there's anything there that is being reproduced now so that you are a victim of what happened to that person in childhood. A lot of times that happens. And is it possible that you could then have a better relationship? Absolutely. But the other has to be open to your gift of forgiveness. Forgive more than ever under those circumstances.
So, Professor, what led you to tackle this as your area of study?
I didn't quite hear that.
What led you to tackle forgiveness?
Oh, what led me to tackle forgiveness? Okay. Well, I was hired by the University of Wisconsin in the Department of Educational Psychology to study what the field calls moral development. And moral development at the time, several decades ago, 4 decades ago now, was that people in academia studied justice. How children think about justice, how adolescents think about justice, how adults think about justice, and you get more complex in how you think about it. And I was an obedient academic, and I studied the theme of justice. And I had grants and publications, and I got tenure studying it. And one day, I woke up and asked myself a very dangerous question. Who am I helping with my research? And you know what my answer was? No one. So I decided to throw all of my research over a cliff. And then, of course, I'm in a publisher-parish major university. So I didn't have another research topic at all. And so I asked the question, what about the reverse of justice? What do we do when we've been treated unjustly? And the idea of forgiveness kept coming up. So I thought, yeah, okay, forgiveness is a moral issue. I can do research on that, and there's probably a lot of it because we're supposed to be in the helping professions. So I went to the library because we didn't have Google, and I had a search done by the librarian of all the published work on person-to-person forgiving, and she came back with a blank sheet of paper. So I said, this is for me. So I started studying forgiveness, and my colleagues basically said, you've lost your mind, Enright. This is a stupid idea. It's much too weak for a hard-headed scientific university. You've ruined your career. And my response was, sorry, I'm not going back to helping no one. And I stuck with it. My grants dried up, okay? I had more to forgive having started studying forgiveness than I ever had in my whole life, okay? But I stuck with it, and to the credit of some academics anyway, when they saw the scientific value of it, they kind of let up on me. But I had to endure a lot because people thought it was crazy. I mean, obviously, it's not crazy.
I have a quick question. I know someone else had one over here. We're in an incredibly litigious society, and people put dollar signs on their forgiveness. Have you done any research or studies on those who have been paid? And this is, of course, close to the heart of the church, which has paid out billions of money in restitution.
Right.
Does that affect how does that affect the forgiveness level of anybody in the situation? And have you studied anything like that?
Well, we have not studied that particular issue, but clearly for those who wish or choose to forgive under that circumstance, I think it would be a good idea, but we have to be very delicate about that because not everyone would do that. But once the idea of being paid out, then the question is, does it help people? Does that itself become healing? Okay? I have not studied the death penalty, but I have examined people who have been victimized by people who have been put to death in the gas chamber, for example, or the electric chair. And what I find is an initial euphoria where there is relief of the heart for the person who's died, but it doesn't stick. After a while, there's the tendency for the resentment to build up again. So getting all the money in the world might help someone, and if you gave them a forgiveness scale or even an anger scale, after they get $500,000, they'll probably look really good on that. But give them 5 years, and I'm guessing that they will be back to an annoyed heart, maybe an enraged heart. In other words, they're going to need more than money to cure the heart as a major effect of what happened in the past. Money isn't strong enough. Death of others with the death penalty isn't enough, okay? And so when you look at that, we need stronger medicine to heal the heart. And forgiveness is that stronger medicine. Tragically, most people don't see it.
You sort of answered it. I was going to ask you rhetorically, how the heck did you keep your job at Wisconsin with this kind of, in this secular environment? So, yeah. But then I'll ask you a different question. Tell us about the students that take your classes.
Well, what's interesting is the students were naive enough to be attracted to forgiveness and not be on my political level of criticism. And it was the students and I who were each other's support groups. For example, in the early days, some of my students were told not to work with me because I have ruined my career and I will ruin their career and they'll never get a job in academia. Okay? So when asked about that, I would have to say honestly, I don't know the answer. It's possible. But these heroic, courageous students stuck with me, and they helped lay the foundation scientifically for a field that is now accepted by the American Psychological Association. I've had a number of books published by APA, which is a highly secular kind of an organization, and they're saying forgiveness works. And they're saying that because they've truthfully seen the science of it. But without the students being courageous to go ahead anyway, we might not have ever built this field. And you know, all of my students who wanted to get jobs in academia have, That's my revenge. Ha! There you go. We have a hand up here, Father.
Sorry, forgive me. What's an appropriate response? Say, there have been a couple times in my life where I have sincerely apologized to somebody that I hurt, and their response is, "You should be sorry."
Yeah.
And so that just builds up another instance of I have to forgive them, but I'm resentful instead.
Yeah. Well, the one thing to keep in mind is that, and we'll talk a little bit more about receiving forgiveness tomorrow, but there's the forgiving and the seeking of forgiveness, right? And sometimes it's the case that one person has been hurt and the other hasn't. So one person is forgiving and the other might be seeking forgiveness, and they might not be at the same level. Okay? So in other words, if you were the one who did wrong, and you have repented to God in confession, let's say, and you go to the other and humbly present the case and say, "I'm sorry, please forgive me," and the other is not ready to forgive, you see, the person's still very, very angry. You're not in sync with one another. And so that's another forgivable offense where you can now forgive the person for your reaching out and that person disrespecting you. And so you have to be aware, either when you forgive or seek forgiveness, if you're not on the same level with the other person, conflict can occur. It's best if you both study forgiving and receiving forgiveness and both are ready on the same level. Okay, that's harmony, but the world is a fallen world, and that's not always going to be the case. So I always tell people, if you want to seek forgiveness, you might have to bear the pain of the other not being ready. Or if you forgive and the other's not ready to seek forgiveness, you have to watch your back with reconciliation, you see. So look at the mismatch between where you are in the readiness and where the other is in the readiness. And if you're even a little bit close to one another, then you can actually reconcile with one another. And that's really one of the major goals of forgiveness, to seek forgiveness, to forgive, and to reconcile.
You kind of touched on it in one of the questions, but have you done work with families of murder victims? A year and a half ago, my sister was brutally murdered and dismembered with her body parts stuck in freezers. And I know I should forgive her murderer, but I'm having a real hard time with it.
Yes. I have not worked directly with murder victims, but a friend of mine, Marietta Jaeger, Jaeger, who is a very serious-minded Catholic. You can go on YouTube and you can see many of her talks. Lost her daughter Susie to a murder when they were in Montana on vacation. And there is a film, I can't find the film anymore. It was on public broadcasting television. And if you can find it, let me know, because I try to pass it to people, called From Fury, F-U-R-Y, From Fury to Forgiveness. And it's all about people who have lost loved ones through murder and their pathway of forgiving. And Marietta Jaeger tells the story of how she was so angry with this person who killed Susie that she could have choked him to death with a big smile on her face. She then realized that this was tearing her own family apart, and she started the forgiving process. 1 year to the minute that this man took and murdered Susie, he called her to taunt her. He called Marietta to taunt her, and she had already worked on forgiveness enough where she said, "What can I do for you?" And it so unsettled him, he stayed on the phone. The FBI then traced the call and found him, and Marietta started to minister to him in jail. That was her gift given to him. She has since remarried. Her husband died early of stress-related causes because his forgiveness journey was much rougher than hers. He didn't want to forgive, and she said he died of stress-related causes. She remarried a farmer in Montana, and she was from the East Coast. That's how forgiving she was, that she could take up residence with a new family in Montana where the tragedy occurred. So you can find Marietta Yeager's, Jaeger, very inspirational work on YouTube. And if you find From Fury to Forgiveness, which is an outstanding PBS film, well worthwhile because I think it would inspire you. What was that?
Spelling of is her Jaeger.
Yeager's Jaeger. Jaeger. She's remarried, and I think her last name is Lane, but I could be wrong on that. But if you Google on YouTube Marietta Yeager, Jaeger, she should come up.
I think maybe one more question before. Did you have a question?
Sometimes when I watch the news reports, especially like when there's been a school shooting, and at the final sentencing or when the verdict is being given, family members can speak to the offender. I find myself being puzzled about, okay, that's probably pretty good about ventilation, but from what you said just a few minutes ago, I mean, that's really just the first step in a long process, isn't it?
That's right. That's the first step in a very long process. It's not the end. It's not unlike the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. The telling of the stories wasn't the end. There should have been a lot more follow-up. Okay, but there wasn't, and because we're all imperfect, and Desmond Tutu is one of my heroes for doing the best he could with it, and he did bring out these issues, and there was pardon, legal pardon, for some who told their stories, but there was also weeping and the wailing of those who heard the stories, and the broken hearts needed more mending. So when we allow people to talk to others, sometimes they chastise, sometimes they forgive, but even if they forgive, the proclamation of that doesn't mean the heart is healed. It is opening the door heroically, and we probably need many, many months of working on forgiving with something that tragic. The deeper the injustice, the deeper the wounds, the longer it tends to take for most of us.
I think we're almost 8:45, and we really...
Yeah, I have just one more quick announcement.
Please, I was wondering about, the books.
Oh, you were going to talk?
No, you go ahead.
Okay. Because forgiveness is for giving, I have some free books for you back here. And so Maria Habib has put them right back here. It's called 8 Keys to Forgiveness, published by Norton in New York City. And we used that book in the Maximum Security Correctional Institution where they were healed emotionally. And so I'm giving that book away to you for free tonight, okay? And so we'll see you tomorrow night for the Catholic version of all of this.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
discussions, but I was going to invite you too, right? That would be great. Yep, and then answer some of the questions. You're welcome.
If you happen to be here, it was I dropped off my youngest Boy Scouts. And I hear the talking going on up here. This feels good. I had no idea this was happening. No, right. I'm indicting myself.
Problems in this profession.
Janice, Steve.
He's got kids in school. They hate their children in school. And her husband is one of the schools.
Sorry to hear
It's good that you came.
that. So tomorrow night is a wrap up with. I heard that. Yeah. Well, wow. I mean, I have to go find non-religious. It's a non-term. Before that phrase, I worked its way into our day-to-day. It was some effort to say secular. It was like, oh, let's just not be religious. Let's unincorporate it. Unincorporate.
You know, we were talking about the story of Joseph when I was teaching him. Because he used to throw out things and do signs and stuff like that. His stories out. Children brings finding and ask for forgiveness and we don't have much to say. You know, yeah. Are you coming tomorrow? Good, good. Good to see you. saying.
But I really ought to just go down to Dallas and live with my brother and be chaplain to the Calvinists.
They need a chaplain in the worst way.
They do help them.
Keep us in the loop, Pat.